Do you believe in alternate universes?
You are listening to Delayed Replay.
The improvised movie review podcast. Wink.
Everything is fine here. We're all fine. Just sit tight and listen to them talk about the movies they definitely saw.
Don't delay. We have to listen right away.
Hello everyone, this is Steven with an intro before the actual episode. Sorry, I've been sleepwalking, apparently due to some otherworldly entity, I think. But that is neither here nor there for the moment. Just want to clear up some things since this was kind of an odd episode. I know some people don't want to be spoiled about the ending of the Walking Dead comic series. No spoilers for the TV show though. So if you're sensitive to spoilers, I'm including timestamps in the show notes that let you know where spoilers begin and end. Even spoilers for a couple other non-Walking Dead things we mention. You can even skip to our final thoughts and scores at the end, and you wouldn't be spoiled. Also, regarding the timeline of this episode, some of this was done after the No Time to Die episode. And I know at the end of the Free Guy episode, I had teased that me and Andres might talk about the final issue of The Walking Dead. Wording is kind of iffy depending on how you look at it, but basically, Andres and I had already actually recorded before the Free Guy episode was done. So I was kind of keeping people in suspense even though it was already guaranteed. Not sure if any of this counts as a lie, but it's kind of funny given that we bring up in this episode whether or not we lie. So we talked about issue 193 for the most part, which we like to think of as the final issue, and a tiny bit about the 3 lackluster issues that followed it. This was kind of weird because, as you'll hear, this was recorded before the July 1st release of a comic book one-shot called Negan Lives, and you get to hear our live reactions to finding out that it's a thing. Andres and I were not able to get together for the Negan Lives segment, but I added a little rundown from myself talking about the issue, post-Free Guy for anyone curious about one. And then the episode returns to the end of our discussion. So for most of this episode, it's me and Andres, and then that Negan Lives segment, it's just me, and then it returns to me and Andres for the end with our final thoughts and scores out of 10, which are pretty broad and non-spoilery, so if you wanted to, you could skip to the final thoughts and scores out of 10. If you're listening on your podcatcher and are sensitive to spoilers, that is. So yeah, without further delay, enjoy Delayed Replay.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Delayed Replay. I'm your host, Steven Schinder, and usually we talk about movies on this podcast, but we decided to do something a little different for this episode. It was a topic suggested by my good friend, Andres Serrano.
Hey.
It's great to have you on this podcast again, Andres. You were here for the first episode.
I was here at the very beginning. I felt like I established the status quo that people must be incredibly awesome to fill this position. And I feel like some of those people have met it. I'm not going to lie. I still think I'm the best one that's been on this show, though. Not going to lie.
I mean, I wouldn't expect you to think otherwise, but...
I did really like Nathan's episode. I really liked that one. I had fun listening to it.
But yeah, like this was your idea to talk about the final issue of The Walking Dead, and my friend Chris, who was on the Milan episode, he was like, "Are you guys actually going to talk about it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think we might." So
I'm really happy that someone was also excited for that episode besides just me.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know like how many people listen to this. Like this podcast, it kind of feels like an excuse for me to just talk to my friends. Surprise!
That's all there really is to do anymore. Am I right? Like when you leave school, when you end, and you're just out in the abyss of the world, what else do you want to do than just hang out with friends? So just
The
do
abyss.
this. Dude, it is the abyss. Well, I've been reading H.P. Lovecraft a lot, and so I have the void and the abyss and everything on fresh on the mind right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the abyss is just like every night, pretty much, like at the end of the day at this point. So,
You just lay down in bed and you just let your mind go into the abyss.
yeah, I mean, I don't even hear the music anymore that I normally imagine before going to sleep. So,
your theme song just no longer plays.
Well, I normally think of like prog rock music, mainly Yes music, but these last few months it hasn't been. I don't know, maybe it's because I've moved to a new place and things feel different, but like I haven't been thinking about music as much before going to sleep since moving here.
What's that quote from The Office that Creed has? The very last episode where he says humans are a funny thing. They can move into a space and they can turn anywhere into a home. So hopefully you'll be able to do that.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, sorry, I was just imagining like The Office if that took place in like a zombie apocalypse.
And Creed Bratton would be the warlord that they have to fight.
Oh, and Dwight would definitely be good at like surviving. Like,
Dwight would so survive. But I think Creed would be the next. I don't think he'd be like Negan. I think he'd be the next governor.
TV show governor or comics governor? Because one is harsher than the other, but they're both pretty bad.
I would say TV show governor because comic book governor to me is a million times more brutal.
Right. Yeah, and Jim would probably become his character from A Quiet Place, right?
Oh, bro, if Jim isn't the same character from A Quiet Place in the universe of The Walking Dead, then he's not casting himself properly.
So issue 193 is what we tend to think about as the final issue because you and I agree that that was a great ending and it should have ended there. And there are like 3 issues that come after that were pretty bad. But in this episode, we'll mainly focus on 193 and I guess try not to spoil the TV show, but we'll pretty much like probably spoil the comics since it's the final issue. So like listeners,
will definitely be spoiling the comic, but I haven't seen the TV show in a couple of years, so I don't know what I can spoil from that because I hardly know much there.
Okay, then yeah, I guess I'll have to keep a tight lid on that, and if anything slips out, I can just fix it in post. But yeah, listeners, for reals, if you haven't read issue 193 and you don't want to be spoiled, like turn this the heck off and go read every single issue of The Walking Dead and then come back in like a few years and listen to the rest of this episode.
Or do what I suggested in the very first episode of this podcast and only read 193, and then you can participate in our conversation.
Do the Lost thing, like know the ending and just come in knowing what happens.
Oh my god! Or do the Lost thing, as we also spoke on episode 1, where you have the ending in mind the entire time while you're in it.
Yeah, just keep that in mind. We'll be spoiling like the end, like for real. Like I don't know how many times I have to say for real. I mean, it's not like we lie on this podcast. Everything we say is like truthful, I think.
So truthful. I've never said a lie in my life, Steven. I tell so much truth that it even hurts. The word lie burns my ears.
Oh man, I can't even lie on a bed. That's how committed I am. I just sleep standing up in a coffin.
I haven't lied down since I was born. I was born standing, Steven.
I was born understanding. Nothing.
Oh! All right, Steven, let's get into this comic. I want to talk about this comic.
Okay, so issue 193.
Issue 193.
So this comes after a time skip. Like at the end of 192, we get the death of Rick Grimes at the hands of like the son of the leader of the Commonwealth, if I remember correctly. And Carl, like, it's like really sad. Like at the very end of that issue, Carl is saying how like he's like crying and he's like, I don't want to live in a world without my dad. But then in 193, we get this time skip to like, I don't know if it's 20 years later or what, but Carl is an adult. And so we see that at some point he was able to live with the idea of continuing to live even without his dad, because it's what his dad would have wanted.
Just for listeners' sake, I'm currently holding my special edition of issue 193, and I will be referring to it throughout the episode. So I will have a visual guide, and I will describe to you these awesome, awesome drawings that were made for this episode.
Ooh, special edition. Do the zombies blink in this?
No, special edition just means it is in a nice cover, and that is about it.
I mean, nice covers are nice to have. I have like the PDF because like at some point a few years ago, I was like, you know what? I'm done collecting physical comics for the most part. There's only so much space that I have, and like, I mean, after moving into the new place, it was a hassle bringing all these boxes of like books and comics and stuff. So I basically keep like the autographed stuff, at least in physical form.
Bro, I have so many comics. I have the limited editions of the Doctor Who run comics. I have the very first 5 issues of the Star Wars comics right in front of me. Each one's valued at a really high amount of money, and they're just sitting right in front of me right now.
Like the original Marvel years?
Yep, the very original first Star Wars comic is in my hand right now as we speak. Darth Vader is painted green. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker's lightsabers are red.
And Obi-Wan's like on fire when he gets struck by Vader's saber, right?
Yeah. Princess Leia has red hair. Like, I got it all. It's all in my hand right now. It's pretty cool. My brother got them a while ago.
Oh, nice. You have a really good brother then.
Yeah, my brother is the one that got me into nerd stuff. And so he became friends with a comic book shop owner who had closed down and is now a mailman. And so he just gave my brother a bunch of stuff for a low price. So I have a signed statue of Greedo in my room right now that's signed by the original actor. And I just have a bunch of other collectible memorabilia around me right now.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I read the first 4 volumes of the, I guess they're called the Epic collection of like the original Marvel years, or I don't know if it's first 3 or first 4, but I got as far as like really deep into the time between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I think the quality wanes a bit after Empire in the comics, as far as I've read, but like the art in the Empire Strikes Back adaptation is so beautiful, and like all the stuff before that is better than like I expected it to be. Like Jackson the Green Rabbit doesn't seem as ridiculous as I expected.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah,
so,
and he's in canon now, so
he is in canon. He is in canon, and that's because the Big Mouse House, or the Big House of Mouse, told us so.
Oh well, I'm saying he is in canon now. Like he's popped up in some things, so
great.
He's
wonderful.
Smuggled himself in, which is great.
Well, sorry to take us on a side tangent about Star Wars and other nerdy things, but back to The Walking Dead. Yeah, I have this limited edition in my hand right now, and I'm super excited to get into this. As you said, Rick has just died, and 193 takes what you assume be 20 years. I think it's more like 15-ish. I think it says in the comic, but I don't actually remember. But there's a pretty big time jump for us right now in this comic.
I might guess 15 too. I think that was what I thought initially, but I don't know. Maybe I just like felt like rounding or something. But
you know what? It might be longer because he has a daughter in this one, and she's like 8 years old or so. So
6 years old.
6?
Yeah.
So at the maybe it's a bit longer because Carl does look very aged in this comic. He has a whole beard. He looks like an actual adult rather than just a teenager. But being in the post-apocalypse, and considering we talked about the post-apocalypse in the very first episode of this podcast, at me, I believe that maybe the fun got started sooner, and maybe it is a shorter amount of time than a longer time.
So Carl is with Sophia, and this is their daughter Andrea, which I think is interesting. How like they named her after Andrea rather than his actual mom, Lori. But yeah, and like Andrea was such a great character, so I was like all for them honoring her in this way.
You know, I've always been a fan of characters being named after predecessor characters in stuff. In this case, it's Andrea. In video games, I don't know if you play the Gears of War series. Marcus Phoenix's son is called JD, which stands for James Dominic. And Dominic is the character, spoiler alert, dies at one point in the series. And so, like, I'm always such a fan of when these characters are like, they're more sentimental to the audience, I guess, when they're named after someone we already knew and someone that already had a lot of importance to the story. Because there's also another Herschel in this comic, right? There's another kid named Herschel, I believe.
Yeah, that is the child of Glenn and Maggie, and he's like an adult now. And it's weird the job he has. Like he, I guess, rounds up a few zombies and kind of puts on a show. Like they're this.
Whoa! Time out. Did you just call them zombies?
Well, okay, so like early on in the comic series, they do use the word zombies, but like over time they use other things like roamers and whatnot. And I know zombies isn't a word in the show, but it was used in the comics. So
Whoa! We are abiding to the status quo of everyone. All right, we are gonna go with that. The term zombie for some reason doesn't exist in reality. I'm going to refer to them as walkers, Stephen.
Fair enough. We could call them, I don't know, Walking Dead.
But the real Walking Dead are the living.
The people.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I once saw a rumor saying that that's why it's called The Walking Dead. It's not in reference to the actual walkers, or as you call them, zombies. They're actually in reference to that these people are living in shells of themselves and lives that they could not connect to anymore, and thus they're referred to as The Walking Dead.
Oh yeah, that was confirmed. Like Kirkman confirmed it, and it was said by the characters within the comics and the show. So
wonderful. See, those are small things that like I read and I never check back up on. So I'm glad I have someone who actually knows.
Yeah, between the two of us, you'll get all the answers. Except
God, probably not. Maybe from you. I'm just here to be the best host or co-host or best guest you've ever had. That's all I'm here for.
Yeah, I think you're like the first returning guest now that I think about it. But
and ain't it so exciting? We get to make references back to the first episode.
Yeah, because that's what everyone wants, callbacks and nostalgia, right?
Exactly. Speaking of callbacks and nostalgia, this whole issue, number 193, is a giant callback and giant nostalgia trip. The whole thing is just like, do you remember that character? Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Hey, I'm going to name drop someone and I'm going to make sure that you did your homework to remember. Like, there's just a whole lot of like throwbacks in this thing.
Yeah, but they didn't feel too in your face to me. It's just that the setting got updated because it's been a huge time skip. So we're checking back up on what everyone's been up to. And it's really fitting that Michonne, who used to be a lawyer, is now a judge. Like, I thought that was a neat evolution of the character.
Bro, let's talk about Michonne. You know, let's just skip to the very end of the comic. Let's talk about that. That was such a trip to see that she is the judge that is coming out, and then she is like putting Carl in his place only to back Carl up. And that was the absolute coolest thing ever.
Yeah, it really shows that the connections between them are still there. And it's weird, right? How this issue is kind of like a courtroom drama thing about destruction of property. Because like Carl killed Herschel's walker or roamer or whatever you want to call it.
Right. We should probably tell people who haven't read the final issue what builds up to this moment.
Right. So like the roamer gets on Carl's property and like he kills it to protect his family, and Herschel gets upset, and like Sheriff Kapoor says that it's destruction of private property, so he has to like go to a hearing and whatnot. And he talks to like Maggie, and there's like this first judge, but later like Michonne is like the second judge, and it's really amazing how
kind of like the Supreme Court system.
Yeah, it's amazing how like it feels like this mundane courtroom drama that should feel boring, but because of like everything that all the characters have been through, it feels perfect to me that something as simple as this would be the final problem, you know? Or at least
because like the stakes are high, you know, like the stakes are super high. Walkers are gone. Like for all intents and purposes, walkers are gone. Owning and having walkers is this commodity that Herschel does. He goes around towns and shows them off to people, parading them like they're part of a circus. And this is like the whole drama is that one of them gets away, gets on Carl's property and starts walking towards his daughter. Carl kills it instinctively, doesn't even think of it as property or anything, thinks of it as a walking killing machine like he has grown up knowing. And then the whole issue is a drama, like you said, it's a courtroom drama where it's about property and everything about it. But it's so wonderful and so incredible because you're seeing characters that you have seen behead walkers, people who have killed other actual humans and all these things, only for them to now be in the situation where they have to defend the right to own a walker and use it as property. And it's such like, you have spent 192 comics before this making the walker the enemy, only for the final issue to tell you walkers are now a commodity. And it's just like, it's a total trip because you're in the shoes of Carl, you're in the shoes of Rick, you're in the shoes of everyone who came beforehand. And like, you're like, nah, they all gotta die. But in a civilized world, we're now taking it to this thing where like, they are a rare commodity. And people have a right to own them so long as they are safe. And it's like this weird duality going on throughout the issue.
Yeah, and Herschel it's kind of weird because we knew Herschel as a baby, and it's like this is what Glenn and Maggie were like fighting for. And to see the piece of scum that he's become, it was
such a scum.
Yeah, it's like so disappointing, but also like psychologically, it's interesting because he talks about how being around the walkers is the only way he can know what it was like to be his father.
There wasn't a moment in which I read this that I didn't hate Herschel. Herschel absolutely sucked. But taking a step back and analyzing it as a person who lives in a non-walker world, and looking upon it, it raises a lot of questions. You know, the whole situation raises a lot of questions about ourselves in the modern age now, where a very extreme example, but something that we can relate to, is the atomic bomb. And this thing where we don't know the truth of an atomic bomb. We didn't grow up in the Cold War. We didn't grow up with the impending fear of being killed by it at any moment and everything. And now we live in a world where we make jokes about the atomic bomb, but we live in this world where like it's just normal. It's something a part of us. It's something we know. It's part of our history. And in The Walking Dead, we run into this exact same situation in which the walkers are a thing of the past. People no longer fear them. They're just something that exists. And being around them for Herschel, he's like, this is the only way I know what the old world was like. And I get it, but at the same time, it's so insincere because he's using the walkers for money and for entertainment. And he's making them look like they were a toy and not a real struggle of the past, which is like why Carl is so relatable, because we have spent 193 issues get here. And in a world in which these walkers are the most dangerous thing, and they killed everyone we knew and everyone we loved throughout the issue, and dang it, like Rick Grimes died. We all saw it coming, but like to see the character that you've been with so far into the comic series to die is such like an emotional thing. And for you to read an issue or two later of this guy promoting the walkers as this great thing, that is so scummy and so brilliantly done. And I absolutely love that they created this drama, which walkers are now a thing of the past and people are trying to move on, which is then later brought up after the courtroom scene. But we can get to that after we talk about Herschel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what else to add about Herschel, but yeah, like the world is different at this point. Like we hear that the safe zone has been expanding and they're starting something with something called the Western Alliance, and you see like railroads being built, and I think there's even a moment where like Carl's reading a newspaper on a train and it feels so mundane, it feels so normal, and it's like, yes, civilization is thriving, like the dead are no longer as much of a threat as they used to be, which is so satisfying to see.
And it's just like, it's this whole thing where the normality is now the beauty of this issue. Seeing them live normal lives is what you wanted from issue number 1. And it's so great to like just see Carl sit there, see Carl ride his horse into town, see him have conversations. But going back to Herschel a little bit, the fact that his mother has such a powerful position and therefore he cannot be touched was so annoying because I just wanted him to get his butt beat, bro. I did not like Herschel at all.
Yeah, and she's like called Madam President, right, at this point?
Yeah. Yep.
It sounds like such a pompous title, but like there you go. And like we do get a little interaction between Maggie and Carl and their whole connection, and but also Sophia telling Maggie that she needs to like put Herschel in his place and how things have been like too easy for him and he needs to like learn. So I thought that was a great interaction to see in this.
Such an eye-opener, right? Like seeing that in a world where there's no longer a walker threat, that you can now be spoiled and you can now have this great life because your mother survived the apocalypse. Like, it's just so weird to see that Herschel was able to be spoiled when you would think that being spoiled is like a thing that can't happen, but it happens. You know, people with power get power, and that's exactly what we see with Herschel and his family.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of eye openers, this is kind of after the courtroom stuff, I think, but when Carl is hanging out with Lydia, who used to be his girlfriend when he was growing up, she asks him why he wears an eye patch still, and she thinks that he wears it for Sophia, but he wears it, like his reasoning is that he wears it for Andrea so that she's
God,
she doesn't,
that was so emotional.
Yeah, so that she doesn't have to see the horrors of what happened before her time. But rereading this issue, it kind of made me think, because on the No Time to Die episode of this podcast, we talked about how it seems like disfigurements are kind of used for villain characters and as like something to hide. And so I was saying in that episode how there should be like more protagonist characters with disfigurements, because like not all people with disfigurements are bad. And so we have Carl in that position, but he doesn't like, obviously he's not like flaunting around the wound that he has, but I don't know, it's just a little connection that came to mind as I was like rereading it this time around.
That's actually a really interesting point, because yeah, we always see the villain with a disfigurement, and when we do see a protagonist with a disfigurement, they're cold, they're hard, they have something about them that the rest of us can't have. But Carl and Rick, while he lost his arm, were very relatable characters, you know, especially Carl in this specific issue. is very relatable because he's just a hurt person in the world and he just wants to move on, but not allow people to forget about it all. And so, like, you bring up a really good point that his scar is not a thing of villainy. His scar is a reminder of the past, and he uses it in such a way to remind us, the reader, of what he's been through, and that his sacrifices are all for good and not for evil. Though the way he lost his eye is completely unrelated to being sacrificed. But, you know, I digress. All right, I want to focus on the second courtroom, which is where we meet Michonne and everything.
Right.
And so, for those of you that aren't going to read issue 193, Carl wins the case because Michonne is someone who lived through this all and recognizes that these walkers should not be paraded and whatnot. And so Carl is not going to be fined. Carl's not going to jail, and Carl wins. They have a very emotional moment. What I want to talk about is when he comes out of this courtroom. You can think of it as the Supreme Court in this case. He comes out of it, and there is a statue of Rick Grimes looking like a hero. And as a reader, it's the most beautiful thing ever, right? Like, you have looked up to Rick for years and years up to, at this point, if you were keeping up. And he has his arm in the air, and it's always heroic and everything. But Carl isn't satisfied with it. Carl does love that he's a hero and everything, but Carl doesn't like seeing that he just looks like that people have to make him look more heroic, that his actions alone are heroic enough. And I thought that was absolutely amazing of writing, or visually showing too. I loved it. I loved every second of that. And even though it's just for like a page and a half, it's astonishingly amazing to me.
Yeah, because Carl tells Sophia that he's like, they shouldn't have to fake it. Like, they have him in this position where I think they describe it like he looks like he's calling down a storm, and it feels over dramatized. But like Sophia says, come on, let's go, so you don't have to look at it anymore. But as they're walking away, Carl looks back and at the statue and he smiles, and it's like,
yeah, I just got chilled looking at it right now. Yeah,
and I just love that moment. Like, yeah, people might exaggerate and whatnot, but the bottom line was that Rick was heroic. And it also kind of reminded me of this scene from a Star Trek comic called Legacy of Spock. I don't know how familiar you are with the Star Trek franchise, but
I know surface level things, so don't expect me to know this deeper knowledge.
Okay, because like I'm kind of gonna spoil the end of Legacy of Spock.
Oh, so go for it.
Okay, so the actor who played Spock, Leonard Nimoy, he passed away like back in 2015, and so in honor of him, they made this story called Legacy of Spock, which is like Spock Prime, like the older version in like the reboot timeline, and showing like his final mission before passing away. And before he dies, like his mission is fulfilled and he's like, I can feel the end nearing now. And then I think years later it shows a statue of him which looks smaller than these like gigantic statues that are around him, like statues of other Vulcans, I believe, or maybe other heroes, I can't remember. But someone was like looking at the Spock statue, which was, he was asking why it's life-sized and not gigantic like the other statues, and the other person says because it was Spock's belief that to do otherwise would be illogical. Oh, that was such a perfect moment, because like Spock is all about being logical, and to like have his request that the statue be life-size rather than gigantic, like it makes sense but also feels humble, like intentionally or not. It was just a perfect ending for Leonard Nimoy's version of the character, I think.
Well, like classic Spock, right? The need of the many is greater than the need of the few. Like, right. Absolutely classic Spock moment. And that's actually really wonderful that they did that for him.
Yeah, I love that comic. So, like, I highly recommend it to anyone, even if you haven't like read the volumes before it. But yeah, like this issue deals with Rick's legacy, and there's like a moment where Carl delivers supplies to Negan's place, but like Negan doesn't answer the door, and Carl is kind of disappointed because he's like seeing Negan kind of, it's a reminder that all the stuff happened and that Rick was real and whatnot, because like he misses his dad even after all these years. And
Oh yeah.
and I do think it's great that we do see Negan at the very end, like just leaving flowers for his wife's grave. Like I don't think she's actually buried there because that was in a different location, but he like leaves that in honor of him, and it shows like how much Negan has grown and changed from like the villain he used to be. Okay, so Carl is at home with Sophia and they're talking, and then you hear Andrea yell out, "Daddy!" and like her parents turn around and it looks like their faces are full of shock as if something terrible happened. And like the first time reading this, I was like really worried that something happened to her, but it just shows
Final
her
twist.
yeah, like it just shows her looking normal, and she's like, "Can you read me a bedtime story?" And so that was a huge relief when like that was all that was. But what did you think of this story time scene?
I think video games and other things have accustomed me to this. I thought ending it with a quote unquote montage that shows us the lives of all the characters that we weren't able to touch upon in this issue and more, but seeing where they are left off in their life was the best way to end the comic book series by far. Being able to see everybody live the lives they've been fighting for since the beginning, being able to see them be remembered and be happy was just so great to watch. It was just so, not watch, but I guess read. It was just so, I thought it was the perfect ending, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, because Carl reads Andrea this, it looks kind of like a storybook. I guess it's also a history book, and it's about like the dark times that he and all these other people went through when walkers were plentiful. But it talks about like how people kept fighting and not losing hope, and like it talks about Rick, and he's like, "That's your grandfather," you know. And Andrea is like, "I know, you tell me that all the time." And then you see like a couple panels of Carl with his eye closed and he's looking sad, but then in the next panel Andrea with a large smile says, "Read it again." And then like the next panel is Carl smiling, and honestly I always get teary-eyed reading this part. Like if I ever need a good cry, I read the ending of this issue because it's very cathartic and like
it's full of emotion.
Yeah, I think of like the emotional music from the end of War for the Planet of the Apes during this. It's like such a powerful ending.
Taking this in a different direction, it's very biblical. It's very allegorical because if you think about it in context of religion and specifically Christianity, church on Sundays, you know, of course it's the Lord's Day and everything. It's meant and seen as a way, as a day of remembrance for the man that sacrificed everything for the better good of humanity and the sin of the world and everything. And Carl keeps giving us this thing throughout the book, through the comic book, and at the very end specifically, where he's like, I know, I tell you this all the time, where Rick Grimes sacrificed himself and everything he stood for this world, and all he wants is just for Rick to be remembered for who he is and how it is, and he doesn't want Rick to be forgotten. It's just this perfect mirroring of the real world, of how Christianity works, and how, if you put it in context of a post-apocalypse, Jesus Christ would work in the same context as this, where it's a way of remembering. It's a day dedicated to, and you don't want to have your savior forgotten. And that's what happens here with Carl, is that he doesn't want the quote unquote savior to be forgotten. And I think it works in such a way that is very understandable if you put it into a perspective that this is why this is the world he wants and that everybody wants.
Wow, yeah. I mean, throughout this series, like there were moments where it seemed like Rick was made out to be an analog of Jesus in a way, and how he's like a savior, whether Rick wants to be or not. But yeah, I never really thought of that like Bible reading connection. Like I always looked at the "read it again" quote as like saying read the whole comic series again, which I do want to do at some point. But yeah, I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, because like for his daughter wants him to read it again. She knows the story very well, and Carl was more than willing to tell it again because to him, Rick is something greater. You know, Rick is the savior. Rick is not the, I wouldn't call him the messiah of this world, but he's definitely up there in this universe. And so I definitely think there's parallels to be made, that the story of Rick continues to be told and to not be forgotten, and he will be remembered forever on in the or hopefully in this world. Be remembered forever on, the same way as we would of a Jesus character in this context, where Jesus is a person who sacrificed everything for the sin of the world. And that's what we get out of Rick, where he sacrificed everything for the greater good of everybody in these issues.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever read the DC comic series Animal Man.
I did not.
The New 52 series, anyway, ended a few years before this Walking Dead issue came out, but the ending was pretty similar, like involving a father reading the story of what their struggles were to his daughter. And like I thought it was kind of funny how like I kind of experienced that same ending again, like reading that series more recently. Also, have you ever played Red Dead Redemption?
Which one? I played them both, but yes. Which one specifically are we talking about?
The first one.
Got it.
The epilogue of that also, like this issue kind of reminds me of that epilogue because the focus is more on the son when he's an adult.
Jack, yeah. That ending is so beautiful in so many ways to that video game. It's so incredible. The first and the epilogue ending, you know? The epilogue ending is the redemption, the revenge and the redemption of the Marston family. And then the whole game as a whole is the redemption of John Marston escaping his past and becoming someone new, only to be betrayed, right? But Jack at the very end is really cool, the way that he gets revenge, gets redemption for the Marston family, and he's able to live a life so full of like feeling great, you know, feeling great that he accomplished.
Yeah, I still need to play the second game at some point. Like I loved playing the first game.
Steven, if you like the first game, Red Dead Redemption 2 will be a masterpiece to you. Absolute masterpiece.
Okay. I mean, I believe you, but like, yeah.
Masterpiece.
Yeah, I definitely want to check it out. Like, somehow I was good at poker in that when I didn't even know what I was doing. Like, I didn't know how to play poker.
I have an idea of how to play poker because of Red Dead Redemption. So
okay, see,
it
like
definitely taught me.
I didn't learn anything about poker while playing in the game, but yeah.
You just threw your chips?
Yeah, pretty much threw the chips, put them in some dip, ate it, double dipped, you know.
Double dipped?
Oh man, have you ever seen this short film called Fresh Guacamole?
No. Sounds delicious.
Okay, I'll send that to you after this. It's really good.
Okay. Can you tell me the premise?
It's a stop motion video of someone making guacamole, but his ingredients are like game pieces, like dice and poker chips and tiny houses that you'd see in I don't know, did Monopoly have those, or maybe it was some other game? But yeah, it's just really satisfying to watch, and it's a visual masterpiece, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll send that to you after this. But yeah, that was issue 193, which I think is a perfect ending for this series, and we like to think of it as the ending. But of course, there are like 3 other issues that came after this that we kind of like to ignore because of how ridiculous they were.
Of course.
So in 194, we get Sheriff Kapoor again, and he confronts Carl and
puts a gun up to his head.
Yeah, he does. Like, this was out of nowhere, and Carl is like, why? And he's like, the dead need to walk. You can't keep stopping them. People need to keep being reminded of what's out there. And like, I don't know, did this feel kind of contrived to you that they made this guy the bad guy, like kind of out of nowhere?
It was a duality thing where Rick was the good cop and we needed the bad cop. And so I thought it was suiting for Carl to have a gun up to his head from a cop. I thought it was suiting. It's the whole premise of the comic book series, a sheriff. Now we have another sheriff, and that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah, he even says, when you're gone, I'll be the new Rick Grimes. And like that freaking hurts to read, because it's like Rick did not die for this nonsense,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, that whole issue, 194, they have like this back and forth that's kind of boring, but like ultimately leads to him like shooting Carl. And so issue 195 is like Carl bleeding and spending like his last day with his family while he still can. And so yeah, because like his wounds are not easy to heal, and so he just wants to stick with his family, which I think is in character with him. So I guess that was kind of nice, but I was still really upset that they were having him bleed to death in this issue.
You would think we would have medicine by now, considering we're back in the civilized world. But no. We're going to let him bleed out. It's fine. He's not of importance. He just bleeds.
Yeah, and it was even more heartbreaking when Andrea tells him to read the story again. And so we kind of get a bit of that, like some of the text. And then the end of 195, his eyes are closed and it's like he's passed away. But thankfully, Sheriff Kapoor got stopped by Sophia, but like it's still really sad that like Carl passes away. And then in 196 is pretty much his funeral. What did you think of the montage of like Carl's life as they're like doing this eulogy type of thing?
It made me realize that the whole series is a whole lot of walking. That's about it. Every single scene was them walking in a new situation, and it made me realize they really were the Walking Dead.
Yeah. Obviously, everyone was sad, and like the readers were sad as well, which is why we like to pretend these last 3 issues didn't happen. But like the final page shows Andrea all grown up, and life looks even more normal than before, and then it just ends. Like it feels kind of abrupt, but yeah, that's those 3 issues. Again, like people can understand why we like to pretend that 193 is the final issue, because that issue is a masterpiece.
Absolute masterpiece. Greatest ending to a series ever. And we don't need to talk about any other ending.
Yeah. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, but yeah, 193 was great. I'm not sure if I have anything else to say about that. I did meet Robert Kirkman once, like 5 years ago. I don't know.
Did you?
Yeah.
I would like to hear about that.
Okay, so have you ever heard of WonderCon?
I have heard of WonderCon.
Okay, so I went to that in Anaheim back in 2015, and I ended up attending the Image Comics panel. And Robert Kirkman was one of the comic book creators there. And beforehand, I'd gotten an issue of his superhero series, Invincible, and also like the first volume of his other series, Outcast, which involves this guy who's like possessed by some sort of spirit or demon or something. It was really good. And
okay.
I also saw someone in a really good Negan cosplay, so that was cool. But yeah, I attended the Image Comics panel, and it was really good. And afterward, like Robert Kirkman came out, and me and some other people were able to like get him to autograph our stuff. And I was even able to ask him a question. My question was, like, there's this web series called The Walking Dead: The Oath, and there was a character in there named Paul. And in the comics, Jesus' original name was Paul Monroe. So I asked him whether it was the same character, and he said no. And I also asked him how different the Outcast TV show would end up being, and he was like, it'd probably be like Walking Dead in terms of like the differences. I still need to watch that show. I don't know why I haven't yet. But yeah, he signed her stuff and then went his own way. And I was able to maintain my composure, look all like casual and whatnot. But as soon as like I was like gone from that, I was like smiling gleefully and like laughing in like excitement, like how I got to meet him and sign a couple comics. So
yeah, man, that's hella rad.
Yeah, so that was cool.
Similar but very different news. Did you hear that Robert Kirkman is releasing one more issue of The Walking Dead?
Oh, is he?
Yeah, it's called Negan Lives.
Oh, I wonder what that's gonna be. Like, is it gonna be Negan just like making breakfast or something?
I don't know. The New York Times says the comic book creators will return for a one-issue story focusing on Negan, one of the villains of the series, in hopes of aiding comic book retailers.
Oh wow! Like I haven't heard of this. This took me completely by surprise.
Yeah, it got announced 6 days ago, according to the New York Times.
Wow, I don't know how I missed that. Where was I sick? Yeah, I don't know why this hasn't been reported more, but yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's super dope. I didn't hear about this either till right this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I hope it doesn't undo his development. Like if it takes place earlier in the timeline, then it'd be fine to show him as a villain. But if it's like around the time of 193, I hope it's more.
I think it will just end exactly where 193 ends. I think it will just run parallel, to what occurred in that time.
Okay, yeah, I'm reading this article right now, and it says
comes out July 1st.
Yeah, and the story will take place sometime during or after the time gap introduced in 193. So, yeah, I guess by the time this episode comes out, that Negan Lives issue will be out. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, we might have to, like, add an addendum to this, like, record a segment and just tack this onto here. Because, like, I might release this in, like, July, like mid-July or something. So I guess we'll just have to see.
Hello everyone, this is Steven after the time jump, but it's not a time jump of 15, 20, or 25 years or whatever it is in issue 193. I still don't know what the exact number is or if it's even been confirmed. But anyway, Andres couldn't join me in reviewing Negan Lives before editing this episode so I can push it out. But I went out to the comic shop the day that this came out. I had to go early enough to grab it because apparently this is a limited run and it's really nice Image and Kirkman and everyone over there did this to, I guess, support comic book retail shops. That was a very nice thing of them to do. But yeah, this is actually the only physical copy of a Walking Dead comic I currently own. But like I said, I own the PDFs of pretty much everything else. And yeah, this special issue, apparently there were no plans for it to be released digitally. It was intended for physical only, which I think is kind of weird. But I don't know, maybe it'll make its way into some sort of collection at some point. I don't know. But yeah, I feel like Negan Lives is a good bookend for Negan's story, along with Here's Negan, which is chronologically the beginning of his story. Like that was pretty much his origin story. From what I remember in Here's Negan, Negan's wife was ill, and while the apocalypse was like starting, and so he was by her side at a hospital, and then she turns into a zombie like after dying pretty much, and we don't see Negan killing her. Like it seems to me like he boarded up the room that she was in because I guess he didn't have it in him yet, but we see the evolution of Negan in that particular story, and eventually getting the bat that he names after his wife, Lucille. And so, yeah, we've seen his journey throughout the Walking Dead comic series from when he first encountered Rick's group in issue 100, which is very controversial. And Negan was a very threatening villain, but he's also had like a very comedic side, and cursing so much in very creative ways. It's kind of a shame that the TV show couldn't have him curse that way, but Jeffrey Dean Morgan still did very well, was very comedic and charismatic, and brought that character to life on the show. Funny thing, when I first read Negan's voice in the comics before ever seeing him on the TV show, I imagined him sounding like Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear. I don't know if maybe it was because like his haircut reminded me of the purple thing that Buzz had, which for a long time I always thought was just his hair, but maybe it was purple hair or black hair stylized as purple, but apparently it isn't. And when I heard that Henry Rollins was kind of the visual inspiration for Negan, there was a time when I kind of tried reading it in Henry Rollins' voice, but couldn't quite shake off the Buzz Lightyear voice. But I think now I'm very used to Jeffrey Dean Morgan's take, and I really like it. So yeah, after All Out War, Negan was prisoner and then eventually helps in the Whisper War and gets his own home, like this house that's far away from everyone else. Feels very isolated. I can't really imagine being this isolated, staying inside somewhere for so long during like an apocalypse and feeling so cut off from everyone. But yeah, even Maggie, who wants revenge, feels like it's a better punishment to have him stay alive rather than kill him, which is what he clearly wants, because he feels like in issue 174, I believe, that he has nothing else to live for, and he even almost relapses by like getting a new bat, and that he seems like he's going to use as the new Lucille, but he doesn't do it, and he has this grave marker in the shape of a cross, which symbolizes Lucille, his wife. I think Negan Lives takes place sometime after issue 174. Maybe not right after, but it doesn't seem like too long after, because Negan doesn't look very aged compared to how he looked in 174. So it's sometime within that era, before the time jump. I thought this was a pretty funny opening. Negan is like looking right at the reader, and it's like, did you think you'd seen the last of me or whatever? And you think that well, I didn't think this. I knew this was going to be like subversion, but it seems like he's going to like attack some people, but it turns out he's just talking to flowers and picking them off, picking flowers, leaving them for Lucille's grave, and he's kind of beating himself up because like he kind of questions whether it's a grave marker for his wife or his bat. I think it's possible that he might have buried the new bat here. When he's talking to the grave marker, he says he's talking to a bat, so it feels very much like it is because of something that happens later. So Negan encounters this woman who shows up on his property named Lucy, and she kind of gets close to him, and he's very suspicious of her. Feels like there's something up, and it feels way too coincidental for this woman to be named Lucy, who sounds very close to Lucille. And I would have bought it if there had been if Lucille's name had been written on this grave marker that seems to be made of twigs or tree branches or something, but I don't think Lucille's name is written on it. So I don't really feel like Lucy could have intentionally made up a name that sounded similar to Lucille. I mean, I'm just now coming up with this, but they could have done a thing where she had been hearing Negan spying on him somehow and heard him say Lucille, so maybe get Lucy from that. I mean, she randomly shows up in his kitchen, so why not, right? But no, apparently the guys she's with call her Lucy, or one of them calls her Lucy anyway, and seems to be her actual name. So I think they could have been more creative with her name. Like Lucy could have been the fake name and then have her get an actual name that didn't sound so close to Lucille. So yeah, these two guys, Derek and Barry, kind of funny that one of them is named Barry, and they force Negan to dig up where his wife would have been buried if he could have brought her remains there. But these guys' motives aren't clearly defined. I don't know if they want the house or his supplies, or if, I don't know, maybe they want to eat Negan or something. I don't really know what they want. They're never really clear, and they see how broken Negan is, and he wants them to kill him, but they force him to dig up the grave, and he's like, don't make me do this, which is why I think that the new bat, whatever's left of him, might have been buried there. I know he burns the bat near the grave marker and then walks away from it at the end of 174, so maybe its charred remains are buried, and he feels like he's regressing, but then some walkers show up and start attacking Derek and Barry, and Negan uses the shovel to fight off these walkers and tries slicing one of the guys in half, and get a sense that he's reverting to his violent tendencies, like just trying to cut this guy in half for the heck of it, but he's also feeling resentful that no one will just shoot him and kill him and just let him die because he's tired of being alone and not being able to hear friendly voices anymore. So after those two guys and the walkers are killed, it's just Negan and Lucy. And so he turns to Lucy, and who had heard him talk about his wife as he was like digging the hole in front of the grave marker earlier, which a story that made her tear up. He tells her that it's about time that he lay his wife to rest, and he knows that her corpse is probably a skeleton by now and somewhere in the hospital, but he has this new sense of purpose, like he wants to travel and journey back to that hospital and be in Virginia, so not too far away, I don't think. And he asks Lucy if she wants to keep him company on the way, and he's like, don't you want to see what happens next? And he's like pretty much looking at the reader when he says this, which is kind of funny. I guess to a casual observer, it might seem like this one shot is setting up a new series for Negan, like maybe his journey to the hospital and whatever else happens. But I personally don't need a series about that, because like we know Negan Lives, pun intended, to be in issue 193. We see him leave flowers at Lucille's grave marker, which in issue 193 is actually a gravestone rather than the cross that we see in 174 and Negan Lives. So I guess this justifies that little change and how it's not really a continuity error. Like you could justify it as like when Negan returned from his journey, he put up a gravestone, engraved it with Lucille's name. I don't know if he ever found her remains and brought them there. Like, who even knows if people were able to, like, get control of that hospital and maybe burned or buried whatever remains were left, or maybe it was, like, super overrun by zombies and Negan was able to find her and bring her to the grave marker. I personally like to think that he did. But either way, I think the implication is that Negan found peace, closure. The fact that Lucy isn't with him in issue 193 might make some people worry about her fate. But I personally like to think that Negan's development wasn't undone and that he would have done his best to make sure that Lucy was safe. So I like to think that Lucy is alive and well. Maybe she's living in one of these communities that are around here, or maybe she and Negan formed some sort of relationship, whether that be a friendship or something else. Maybe they're roomies. I'm sure some people probably want them to be a couple. I don't know what the intention is, but I do think that Negan finally found peace. And I don't think his journey took however long the time jump was between 174 and 193, because like the gravestone is already there when Carl visits the house and like Negan doesn't answer. So I don't know, maybe Negan was out during that scene, busy gathering things, maybe visiting Lucy even somewhere if they live in separate places. I don't know, but yeah, I think Negan got his redemption and that he's finally at peace, got the closure that he needed. I remember back in the day when Robert Kirkman said that there would be no novelization for Negan the way The Governor was novelized. The Governor was given these 4 novels that detailed his psyche and like his journey to becoming who he is and believing that he is someone else whom he actually isn't. And it's very interesting. I recommend those books. And I've read the novel that came after those 4, Descent, but I haven't continued past that. I should fix that at some point. But yeah, I feel like Negan's whole characterization did well even without a novelization. Like it worked well with just these comics, the main series, and having that book ended with Here's Negan and Negan Lives. So I think we have Negan's complete story, all that we really need to know about him. And I'm fine with this being the last we see of him and of the Walking Dead comics in general. I kind of wonder where this would go in the reading order if someone's reading this for the first time. I guess I'd put it right after 174. Because if you put it as the last issue you read, that's kind of awkward. Like me and Andres were saying, 193 is the perfect ending. And also like putting Negan Lives before the time jump like kind of ruins the continuous sequence between like where Carl is at the end of 192 and what he becomes in 193. I think it's better to go straight into 193 from 192. So yeah, I'd put Negan Lives right after 174. And I guess you could put Here's Negan anytime before any of that. I'm sure there are debates online of where to put it. But yeah, that's what I thought of Negan Lives. I'm glad I got it. If I were to give it a score, I would give it an 8 out of 10. Like I said, it's kind of came out of nowhere, and I'm sure the argument could be made that it wasn't really quote-unquote necessary. Kind of the same way that El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie, wasn't really necessary, because it pretty much went through the motions that I expected from the end of Breaking Bad, but it was still enjoyable to watch nonetheless. And I think I even gave that movie an 8 out of 10. By that same token, Negan Lives was very enjoyable hearing him talk the way that he does again, like all the cursing and whatnot. It was like a nice trip down memory lane. So it's harmless. It's not the best thing ever, but it's good enough, I think. And so with that, we will go back to before the time jump and finish up the discussion between me and Andres.
What would you say your final thoughts are on 193 and I guess the other issues and scores out of 10?
All right, 193, 10 out of 10. All the others, don't even read them. You know what? They're so bad. Don't even look them up. Don't even look into it. Just focus on 193. If you want to get into a comic book series but are frightened about how large they are, The Walking Dead is in fact a very large one. I would recommend reading the beginning, try to look up what important issues there are throughout the way, and reading the end. Because I understand that 193 issues is a lot to get through, but I definitely think this ending is very much worth like at least looking into the series because it's a really good ending.
All right. I would just recommend reading every issue. So
gosh darn it, Steven.
But yeah, I'm in agreement. Like 10 out of 10 for 193, 0 out of 10 for the others. Yeah, I mean, it's just the perfect ending that the series deserves. Even like how like despite how normal it feels. I mean, after such a post-apocalyptic thing, you would want people to like remember what happened, but also be able to move on and create their new type of normal and adapt and keep all the things that were good, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess that'll do it. Where can people find you online, Andres?
Yeah, I mainly keep all of my social medias consistent. So if you just look me up on Instagram, I am at Pojeki. That's Pojeki. If you want to look for me on Twitter, I'm also under the same user handle. And yeah, I don't really do much. I just do improv. I do comedy. I play video games, and I am the best guest star Steven has ever had. So just look into me if you'd like.
Oh man, that'll sound dated if I somehow get like a celebrity on this podcast, but I don't think that's ever
No,
gonna happen.
because I will be better than whatever celebrity you have, Steven. I'll be better. I will challenge them.
To like a duel or like what?
I'll challenge them to a duel. I'll also challenge them to a podcast off. I don't know. I'll challenge them to something. I'll figure it out.
Fair enough. And you can find me at Steven Schinder on Instagram and Twitter, Steven Schinder Storytelling on Facebook. You can find my writing at stevenschinder.com. Lemons Loom Like Rain, my fantasy horror comedy novel, is available on Amazon. And if you want to get in touch with the podcast and have your thoughts about any movies or video game or comic that we've discussed on here, you can email delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. And we might respond to your email in a delayed reply segment.
Or I guess letter hacks, as they call it in the Walking Dead comics. The next topic will be a video game called Fast and Furious Crossroads. And then the next movie topic will be F9. So very fitting tie-in there.
All right. Without further delay, have a good day.